Mr. Aazim, how is the Sri Lanka economy during this week? How is the overall assessment about our economy?
Yeah, Sri Lankan economy over the week is in fact a continuation of what we have seen over the last 2 weeks or so with regard to the developments in the money market and the impact coming from the developments in the international global economy. And of course, in the money market, you have seen that the levels of excess liquidity we had at the beginning of the year has come down to some extent, but still we are having the excess liquidity of around 20 to 25 billion in the market. And some banks, of course, really in excess, but at the same time, some banks, of course, have some concern over their financing. But generally, we have seen with the open market operation, we have facilitated through auctions in the open market operations, and this helped to supply whoever requires liquidity, and that helped to stabilize the overnight market rates over the week. And with regard to the general pattern of developments like growth and the inflation, these are very much in line with our overall expectation for the year. And the growth is still projected to be 8.3% for the year. And of course, inflation, as you already know, the September inflation has come down to 6.4%, and we are expecting the trend to see in the coming months also. And for the year as a whole, somewhere around 6% of inflation is expected. And of course, apart from that, what you see is the kind of growth in money supply, and also with respect to the kind of credit boom. And these were in fact happening because of the expansion of the economic activities, especially facilitating the north and eastern part of the country's expansion in economic activities, and also with regard to the other activities which is actually growing at a reasonable pace over the last 1 year or so, and the pattern is still continuing, and we expect economy to have this trend being continued over the next couple of months and to the next year. And overall, we do not see much of unfavorable developments in the international markets to be filtered into the Sri Lankan economy, because we are more or less notice the kind of diversification with regard to the international trade of exports from our traditional markets to emerging market economies, and also imports being more or less driven by high crude oil prices, which has gone up to like over $107 per barrel averagely for the first 7 months of the year, from somewhere around $77 per barrel in the first 7 months of 2010, which been now more or less stabilized in the international market, the commodity prices, especially the crude oil prices. And the international markets too, and the forecast too, seems to be projecting that the commodity prices to more or less stabilize, if not marginally decline. So the impact of such a thing will be more or less will come to Sri Lanka's import side, and which will be taken care by the more or less declining import value to some extent. But overall, the both exports and imports have grown, and which will more or less signal the expansion in domestic economic activities, and also spreading out of many growth related projects of the Sri Lanka's economy. Yeah.
How about the exchange rate situation during the week?
More or less, the exchange rate remain very much at levels what we have seen in the last week or so. To some extent, there's a marginal few basis points increase with regard to the cross rates that you might see, but generally it's stabilized, and the injection to some extent has taken place, but not necessarily by it was something like a small numbers, but generally the exchange rate were more or less at levels what we have seen over the last 1 week or so.
How about the global market operations during the week?
In the global market, of course, the week started with somewhat gloomy picture for the Eurozone. But then, of course, most of the developments being factored in, and the market responded, especially yesterday and today, to give some strength to the Eurozone economies by building up their currency levels against other major currencies, and we do not see much of a change coming in over the next week or so with respect to Eurozone, except for the fact that any news we are expecting from France and Germany's efforts to stabilize or inject some of the amounts to expecting economies. But generally, the Eurozone has seen a kind of lower momentum, and this momentum will not recover that soon, but probably we will see somewhat of a continuation of the pattern we have noticed over the last couple of months in the Eurozone especially. And the emerging market economies still appearing to drive the global economic recovery and global economic growth. And the slowing down of commodity prices also to some extent helped some of the emerging market economies, where some of the commodities that they bring in for their economic expansion now being kind of more or less facilitated, although the exporting countries of some commodities might have decline in their international market exposure. But generally the developments with regard to the advanced economies is still a slow recovery, and of course the emerging market economies have the momentum of taking the world economy forward.
How about the Sri Lankan impact about the global crisis situation?
The global market impact to Sri Lanka is mainly coming through the external sector, and the external sector's impact in Sri Lanka has been seen in the sense of the international trade, and still Sri Lanka's exports are more or less performing at a healthy pace, and we have noticed that the expansion is continuing, and the impact to the Sri Lanka's exports, one could expect our exports markets, especially in advanced economies, when they are not performing, will have a negative impact to Sri Lanka's export. But it's not necessarily right, because the exporters have already taken care of geographical diversification into emerging market economies, and because of that reason the exports are still growing at a reasonable pace of over 30% for the first 7 months of this year, recording more than $6 billion US dollars. And the import worth of front, exports. What we have noticed is the somewhat declining commodity prices, which in fact will help to Sri Lanka's import volume to some extent. The import value will come down because the import has increased in the first 7 months of 2011 by about 48% to close to 11 billion US dollars. And this is mainly because of the high petroleum prices and the petroleum imports, and the stabilizing international petroleum prices will help the kind of the growth, if not the expanding import value in Sri Lanka, and thereby it will help to kind of stabilize the current account balances. And apart from that, for Sri Lanka's the remittances, what we have noticed, as usual, it's increasing at a healthy pace, and that will contribute, and also the FDI flows and increased tourism earnings, and these were helping in the current account to more or less take care of whatever trade balance impact on the current account front. And apart from that, the financial and financial and capital account will still kind of contribute in Sri Lanka's overall balance of payments to be in positive. And in fact, the international developments in advanced economies, which to some extent expected to have an impact on Sri Lanka, but this been already considered at various levels, and we have seen this impact being more or less negated by our exposure, especially the exporters' exposure, and also our already moved into some of these emerging market economies, and also the tourist arrivals. It's increasing at a rapid pace, and for the first 8 months, if not first 9 months, tourist board information says that we have already touched 600,000 arrivals, and these also contributing to have about close to 500, more than 500 million in earnings, tourist earnings for the first 8 months of this year. And all this been looked at, the overall balance in the external front is still in surplus, and we see the expansion in the trade front that is mainly due to the expanding economic activities, and also to some extent the impact of increased oil import bill in the import expenditure.
Okay. How about the capital market in Sri Lanka? The market is expecting a lot in foreign funds. Do you have any idea about that?
And in fact, what we have noticed in the stock markets is that not necessarily the funds which comes in isolation to Sri Lanka, but generally this coming as a whole. And as you might know, when the advanced economies have some concerns, of course their first preference is to see their domestic investments, domestic markets, and there's somewhat kind of a decline in fund inflows, but generally what we have noticed is still the interest in Sri Lanka's government papers by foreigners' investments. Still, on a net basis, it's at a quite high positive number. It's close to 180 to 200 million for the first 8 months of the year. And also, if you look at some of these other inflows to Sri Lanka, like FDI, and it's been recorded some 413 million for the first 7 months of 2011, and this is almost like 50% increase compared to first 7 months of last year. And we expect in the latter part of this year we will have some inflows coming in, and this will more or less help us to have some positive capital inflows overall in the year. Although the kind of developments in the advanced economy is not necessarily is something that you expected, but to some extent we have factored most of these kind of possibilities in our overall assessments at the beginning of the year.
And during the week, we saw that Pakistan further liberalized their trading with the SAARC countries. How about the Sri Lankan impact for that?
And in fact, their liberalization among the SAARC countries is something that we all expected, and we have already initiated some preferential trade arrangements with Pakistan. And apart from that, that will of course will have more diversification, as I said already, the geographical diversification which is taking place, and then of course with more avenues opening up in the SAARC region, that will further help Sri Lanka's international trade to withstand from any kind of risks in slowing down in traditional markets, especially in Eurozone. So I see this the news from Pakistan is something that is favorable, and we should work faster to gain from this kind of openings.
How about the Vietnam relationship during?
And it's still at very early stage, but a kind of understanding and of course at higher levels of authority, which been very positive, which will help us to have the access more into the East Asia, and especially to Vietnam and the bilateral trade and other developments.
Okay, thank you.